back to my midlife transit series. This video is the 5th video in the series, and I'm going to be talking about the Jupiter return. This is like a breath of fresh air after the tumultuous squares and oppositions that kind of threw our life into a little bit of a chaos. We get an opportunity to have some, growth and luck before our Chiron return. It also brings in teachers, and it's a time, if your life is going successfully, that you invest in your future. So before I begin, I'd like to invite you to sign up for my newsletter. I'll link it below. After this series, I'm going to be sending out some information about how you can track these cycles in your own chart, as well as I might be presenting a webinar where you can join. We can talk about your chart as a group, and we can talk about the cycles and how they show up in our chart. Lastly, I'm putting out a solar return special on my Facebook page. I'd like to invite you to connect with me in some way so that we can share, and I can share some of the things that I've been interested in. But if nothing else, if you like this series, please like and subscribe. I hope to be putting out some informational content that is useful to you. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. I love to connect with other people who are into astrology as much as I am. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to be talking about Jupiter, the planet. I think it's very important to understand these archetypes as astrologers view them and have viewed them over time based on the physical attributes that they've seen in the sky, as well as the mythology. So without further ado, let's talk about Jupiter, the planet. Jupiter is the world of extremes. It's the largest planet in our solar system. If Jupiter was a hollow shell, 1,000 Earths could fit inside. Jupiter is also the oldest planet, forming from the dust and gases left over from the sun's formation 4.5 billion years ago. It has the shortest day in the solar system, even shorter than Saturn, taking about 10 hours to spin around on its axis. It makes a complete orbit around the sun in about 12 Earth years. Jupiter's signature stripes and swirls are actually cold, windy clouds of ammonia and water floating in an atmosphere of hydrogen and helium. The dark orange stripes are called belts, while the lighter bands are called zones, and they flow east and west in opposite directions. Jupiter's iconic red spot is a giant storm bigger than Earth that has raged for hundreds of years. So it's quite a chaotic atmosphere. Jupiter helped revolutionize the way we see the universe and our place in it. In 1610, when Galileo discovered Jupiter via its 4 large moons, these observations were the first time that celestial bodies were seen circling around an object other than the Earth or the sun. It supported the Copernican view that Earth was not the center of the universe. In fact, Jupiter forms a kind of miniature solar system with its 95 recognized moons. So I got this information from Theosophy Trust, which has such a great longer article. If you're inclined to want to read the rest of it, was really great. It describes its relationship with the sun and the solar system this way. Calculations of the thermal history of the planet show that when it was formed, Jupiter was 10 times bigger than it is now, and its central temperature was 50,000 degrees Kelvin, as opposed to its present temperature of 30,000 degrees Kelvin. Its initial brightness was 1% of that of the sun. Yet now, although it is by far the most brilliant sphere in our system apart from the sun, it is only 1/billionth as bright. Such a remarkable history has stimulated observers to surmise that Jupiter may have originally been an unequal partner in a binary system rather than a merely, a product of the sun. If one attempts to consider the solar system as a whole, one notices that the sun is overwhelmingly larger than the planets surrounding it. In terms of the distribution of planetary mass within the system, the inner planets and their satellites comprise only 0.5%. a ratio which places the Earth and her immediate neighbors in the ranks of near insignificance from the standpoint of size. The remaining 99.5% of the planetary mass lies beyond Mars and is bound up in the giants whose orbits trace the outer regions of our solar microcosm. Looking at the entire system, one can say that dynamically the solar system is composed of two main bodies, the Sun and Jupiter. This comes more sharply into focus when one considers that Jupiter's mass is twice that of all the other planets put together. And though it has only 1,000th of the mass of the Sun, it is truly a center unto itself. So I wanted to look at these pictures that really describe the what do they call, the magnetosphere, and what kind of energy comes out of the planet and how far it goes. Jupiter possesses a powerful internal source of energy equal to the absorption of solar energy. In fact, Jupiter radiates twice as much energy as it absorbs from the Sun, and its atmosphere is driven by this rather than by solar energy. It also has a magnetic field, which is intrinsic and very powerful. This field, which is 8 times more powerful than the Earth's, floats on top of Jupiter's cloud deck and becomes very distorted further out because of a huge belt of plasma made up of hydrogen ions and electrons, which surrounds and co-rotates with the planet. This creates a magnetosphere in the shape of a huge disk, which is countered by the solar winds on the sun side of the planet, but elongates in an enormous magnetotail on the other side, which stretches as far as Saturn. That is, as far from Jupiter as Jupiter is from the Sun. As the magnetic axis of this field is 10% off from the planet's rotation axis, it flops up and down like a broad-brimmed summer hat in a rippling wind and casts off electrons and ions which fall through space, reaching the atmosphere of our Earth. So it's interesting because it's within the bounds of Saturn, but its energy reaches Saturn and it impacts Saturn. Saturn contains it, but it also impacts Saturn, and then it reaches the Earth and impacts the Earth. So the level of impact both ways and the largeness of the impact and the expansion on us is fascinating to think about just from the astronomical perspective. Planets, of course, it contributes to the planet's symbolism as, the place of growth, the place that we are looking toward to move forward into expansion, and where we learn based on that expansions, based on Saturn's kind of boundaries. When you grow too big, too fast, Saturn kind of comes in and contains that growth. But it's just amazing that Jupiter is so big and such a powerful planet in our solar system and is only comparable to the Sun. And when you think about it from an esoteric perspective, it's interesting to think about the mythology and how it has come to be symbolized as, the king, the Trinity, basically, something to think about. Okay, so to transition to the mythology, this is a great quote that it includes in this Theosophy Trust, and it's from Prometheus Bound. It is not only the ruler of gods, a complete tyrant, violent to all, respecting none, first being himself a god, he burneth to enjoy a mortal maid, and then torments her with these wonderings. So, people always talk about the positives of Jupiter, and, it's the planet of luck, supposedly, but, it's got its other side to it. It's got its chaotic and tyrannical side to it. So it's interesting to think about as well. And that'll be seen more in the mythology. So let's go into the mythology. So Jupiter was the supreme god of the Romans and Latins, a god of the sky and weather, as well as a champion of world order, the state, and the Roman Empire. In mythology and art, Jupiter was largely identified with his Greek counterpart Zeus, though the two gods had separate cults. You know, there were religions around these two gods, which is interesting when you think about how religion has transformed. And I don't know. I mean, people think that these old traditions were, you know, superstitious or whatever, but then, you know, people can think about religion in today's religion in an entirely different way, even though you have your atheists too, who think that any type of religion or these types of, you know, worshiping something greater than ourselves or having awe over the universe and even being agnostic as, you know, kind of misguided or a place where people are, you know, controlled by the powers that be, because it's a distraction from the material, you know, the material of the world and how people control others through these various belief systems. It's really interesting, I think, to think about, you know, where we have been and where we are today. As the god of the sky, Jupiter commanded lightning, thunderstorms, and the weather at large. Like Zeus, his Greek counterpart, Jupiter wielded thunderbolts as weapons. And this is really interesting because Uranus, you know, is better known for the, you know, creating this thunder and, you know, these electric currents that kind of change everything. But really, Jupiter was symbolic of thunderbolts, you know, and Jupiter came from Saturn, and Saturn came from Uranus in the mythology. But it's interesting to think about because I hadn't really thought about Jupiter as, you know, the ruler of thunder. But when you study esoteric astrology, which I have barely done, Jupiter is actually the ruler of Aquarius in the higher dimensions. Which is interesting because they say the co-ruler of Aquarius is Uranus. Okay, so he was also god of rain and thus worshipped in connection with agriculture as the god who caused crops to grow. But Jupiter was more than just a weather god. He was seen by the Romans as the god of order in the broadest sense, embodying and upholding the world order. For instance, as the god of divination, the process by which omens were deciphered by officials known as agors, Jupiter guaranteed that the events predicted by observable omens came to pass. So this is interesting because it does inform, you know, Jupiter. Some people say that Jupiter is the ruler of the ninth house, you know, and that is symbolic of, you know, the law and the people that are, you know, sometimes you could describe them as the scholars, and you could probably make a case for it to be describing religion. I mean, it is describing religious scholars and astrologers. You can make a case for ruling the ninth house. Jupiter guaranteed that events predicted by observable omens come to pass. By extension, Jupiter was also the god of the political and social order and the highest authority of the state. No surprise then that Roman emperors likened themselves to Jupiter from the time of Augustus onwards. Supreme rulers, kings. Jupiter was a god of war as well, which I think is important to understand. So he was the god of war, and usually that is described with Mars. So it's interesting to think about that from, yeah, okay. So it goes on to say closely connected with the war god Mars from an earlier period, but rather than taking the active part in battles, Jupiter was thought to oversee and control them. As Jupiter stator, for instance, Jupiter could establish troops and make them steadfast in battle. So he was more of the commander. Roman commanders would dedicate the spolia optima. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The spoils taken from an enemy commander killed in battle to Jupiter Feretrius. David McMahon writes, I found this in the School of Traditional Astrology. He had a post about this, and he writes about it, Jupiter, from a couple of different perspectives. In the Jewish Kabbalah, Jupiter is the fourth sphere, mercy, chesed. Let me see, I have that here. Okay. Jupiter is the fourth sphere, mercy, or Hesed, sorry, I pronounced that wrong. The forms the moral triad with Gabura, Mars, and Tipereth, the sun. Here, the benefic Jupiter and malefic Mars symbolize the constructive and destructive principles of the universe. So I think this really does kind of bring together both sides of Jupiter. And most of the people that talk about Jupiter really highlight the sun side, you know, the king of glory and luck. And they don't think about it from the destructive side. Like I said, you know, there's can be too much of a good thing. So too much expansion, too much thinking you're God, thinking that you have the answers, becoming haughty about, you know, yourself can really provide a lot of destruction. And you see this, Jupiter is, they say that Pisces and Jupiter are interconnected. Neptune is co-ruler of Pisces. Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius, but the co-ruler of Pisces. And so this is where you see a lot of the addictions happening. So you can, or the corpulence of eating too much. So there's can be too much of a good thing that can be destructive. So the contrast is reflected in the opposition between their exaltations, because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, but a detriment in, detriment in Capricorn. So according to Antiochus of Athens, this is because they are life and death. A comment which takes us back to to Babylon, where Jupiter, or Marduk is another description of where Jupiter originates from, was the creator, and Mars, Nergal, was lord of the underworld. Hesed also lies on the pillar of creation between Chakma, pure creative power, and Netzach, individualized images, representing archetypal ideas. This is reflected at a human level in Jupiter's ruler of the 11th house. That is what some people believe, that Jupiter finds his joy in the 11th house, which is the Aquarius house, which is, again, is interesting to look at that and how that relates. In the major arcana of the tarot, the Golden Dawn associated Jupiter with the Wheel of Fortune. This card is now used to symbolize luck, though it may originally have represented prudence. Either meaning would be appropriate. Other attributions are also possible, particularly the Emperor, the Pope, and Justice. And I actually found the Emperor to be a little bit more closely aligned. And I took this from the Meditations on Tarot on the Emperor, which is quite a wonderful book. It's a really deep about the Tarot and kind of links it to the esoteric side of the Tarot, which people don't really understand the historical, they don't have the depth of where the Tarot comes from as our spiritual journey. And I think it's helpful to understand that, because it brings a lot of depth to your readings. I'm not a person that does Tarot, but I loved this book. I really loved it. The less superficial a person is, and the more he knows and is capable of, the greater is his authority. To be something, to know something, and to be capable of something is what endows a person with authority. One can also say that a person has authority in proportion to what he unites himself of the profundity of mysticism, with what he unites within himself of the profundity of mysticism, the direct wisdom of gnosis, and the productive power of magic. Whosoever has this to a certain degree can found a school. Whosoever has this to a still higher degree can lay down the law. It is authority alone which is the true and unique power of law. Compulsion is only an expedient to which one takes recourse in order to remedy a lack of authority. Where there is authority, i.e., where there is a present of the breath of sacred magic filled by the rays of light of gnosis emanated from the profound fire of mysticism, their compulsion is superfluous. Now the emperor of the fourth arcanum of the tarot does not have a sword or any other weapon. He rules by means of the scepter, and by the scepter alone. This is why the first idea that the card naturally evokes is that of the authority underlying law. The card teaches us in the first instance that the emperor has renounced compulsion and violence. This is important. He has no weapons. His right hand holds the scepter forward, on which his gaze is fixed, and his left hand holds his tightly fastened belt. He is neither standing nor sitting. He is simply leaning against a lowered throne and has only one foot placed on the ground. His legs are crossed. The shield adorned with an eagle rests on the ground at his side. Lastly, he is wearing a large and heavy crown. It is said that nature has a horror of emptiness. The spiritual counter truth here is that the spirit has a horror of fullness. It is necessary to create a natural emptiness, and this is what renunciation achieves in order for the spiritual to manifest itself. The Beatitudes of the Sermon on the Mount state this fundamental truth. The first beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, means to say that those who are rich in spirit, who are filled with the spiritual kingdom of man, have no room for the kingdom of heaven. Revelation presupposes emptiness, space put at its disposal in order to manifest itself. This is why it is necessary to renounce personal opinion in order to receive the revelation of the truth, personal action in order to become an agent for sacred magic, the way or method of personal development in order to be guided by the master of ways, and one's personally chosen mission in order to be charged with a mission from above. The emperor has established in himself this fourfold emptiness. This is why he is emperor. This is why he is authority. He has renounced personal intellectual initiative, and the emptiness which results is filled by divine initiative, or the yod of the sacred name. He has renounced action and movement, and the void which results is filled by revolutionary action and magical movement from above. Finally, he has renounced his personal mission. He has become anonymous, and the emptiness which results is filled with authority. He doesn't have to prove himself. You know, the people who have authority are not the biggest boasters. You know, they're not the people that have to prove that they're something. You know, there's so many of these false prophets out there boasting about themselves, but those aren't the ones that have true authority. Lao Tzu reveals the arcanum of authority in his Tao Te Ching. He says 30 spokes unite in one nave, and because of the part where nothing exists, we have the use of a carriage wheel. Clay is molded into vessels, and because of the space where nothing exists, we are able to use them as vessels. Doors and windows are cut out in the walls of a house, and because they are empty spaces, we are able to use them. Therefore, on the one hand, we have the benefit of existence, and on the other, we make use of non-existence. And again, be humble, and you will remain entire. Be bent, and you will remain straight. Be vacant and you will remain full. Be worn and you will remain new. He who has little will receive. He who has much will be embarrassed. Therefore, the sage keeps to one and becomes the standard for the world. He does not display himself, therefore he shines. He does not approve himself, therefore he is noted. He does not praise himself, therefore he has merit. He does not glory in himself, therefore he excels. And because he does not compete, therefore no one in the world can compete with him. In the lesser arcana, Jupiter, planet of the fourth sphere, is given to the fours because Jupiter is a diurnal planet. The fire and air suits are favorable. The Four of Wands is called perfected work, and the Four of Swords, rest from strife. The earth and water suits, however, manifest the less agreeable side of Jupiter, which is funny because Jupiter is actually exalted in Pisces, which is water. The Four of Coins is called earthly power and sometimes indicates greed or arrogance. The Four of Cups is blended pleasure, where success has led to satiety or world weariness. And again, I'll go back to Theosophy Trust. They write there, the descent of the active potency is dramatically conveyed in the story of Leda, who, suddenly pursued by Zeus, assumed the form of a swan. This form is associated with the commandment of time cycles and is productive of the fabled egg mentioned in many ancient tales, ultimately signifying the world egg. Not to be frustrated in his fervor, Zeus gained his mate in the guise of the divine swan, thus ensuring the formation of the egg and the birth of Castor and Pollux, night and day incarnate. In fathering the world egg, and the egg-born Zeus or Jupiter represents the immutable cycle law of evolution, which inexorably determines human progress. He overbroods karma and arrests the downward tendency of each root race after attaining the zenith of its glory. With the egg-born third race, humanity began to determine its own destiny within the framework of cosmic law. Each human race, developing through a series of collective causes and shared effects, weaves its own greatness and eventual decline. The spiritual truths which each keeps alive are protected, concealed, and preserved by Jupiter, whose beneficence thwarts the forces that would corrupt them. He does this by unleashing tremendous cataclysms, such as those which resulted in the submersion of Atlantis, when all the gods under his leadership abandoned the earth, whose meridian and then became parallel with the ecliptic of the sun. It's a great rounding out of the actual description of Jupiter as it lives in our solar system. Okay, now I'm going to transition to talk about Jupiter and the perspective of Jupiter as symbolic of the higher mind. And I read for this series, I opened the book that I had purchased again a long time ago that hadn't read completely. And it's Stephen Arroyo, Exploring Jupiter. He's got a couple of really good books. And basically they're compilations of other masters of astrology, plus some of his, I think his webinars, because it looks like he's kind of taken a variety of places to source his content, and is quite good. His books are very full and rich. Okay, so what he says, an especially important feature of Jupiter's nature and mythology, as well as in the interpretation of Jupiter in astrology, is the link between Jupiter and what was often traditionally called the higher mind. This aspect of mind can also be called nobler mind or divine mind. The symbol or glyph commonly used for Jupiter has been said by many authors to represent this theme of the higher mind, expanding its scope beyond the limits of the material world. Most authorities state that the half circle and a cross make up the Jupiter symbol. So I wanted to show this here. So this is the half circle and this is the cross. And so that's what makes up Jupiter. the half circle is said to represent soul or mind, and the cross symbolizes matter. The half circle in Jupiter's glyph is above the horizon, is above the horizontal or the horizon of the cross, unlike Saturn's symbol, which is similar, but it's below and thus symbolically subservient to nature and matter. In fact, Saturn's symbol is essentially that of Jupiter upside down, which is interesting. If you, there's a great video about the symbols, which was put out, oh gosh, I'm going to forget his name. He's somebody that I follow and I'm blanking on his name. It was on Astrology Hub. Oh gosh, I'm going to have to come back to it. But it was a great, I'll link it below too. It was a great episode. Gosh, why am I forgetting his name? Sometimes that happens to me. I'm like a fish. My memory is very bad. That's why I have to write all of these notes for these episodes. But anyway, in fact, Saturn's symbol is essentially that of Jupiter upside down. Jeff Mayo says that this denotes that the human soul and mind must expand and develop new awareness and a higher consciousness beyond yet out of physical experience and the earthly environment. Hence, once again, we find this intermixing of the spiritual and the material. In fact, Mayo nicely summarizes the meaning of Jupiter's symbol to mean ideally something similar to what Jung calls the individuation process, the constant growth toward more inclusive wholeness, which Mayo says in the case of Jupiter involves learning through deep and wise participation in and understanding of mundane experiences, while simultaneously preserving his natural right to develop his own unique nature. That's from the Planets in Human Behavior, which is really interesting because I think it describes my time in the Jupiter return. It was very much in the midst of my individuation process as I was going through these midlife transits. I can say for sure that that's what it was. And then I've gone and expanded kind of what I had been doing at that time, which was trying to individuate. And I don't think it's like a one, it's, you know, it's a spiral. I don't think we just kind of visit these themes once and then we're done with them. It's a spiral. And so, you know, you go through these times when you're like, I need to be my own person. I don't want to be a part of the group. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to be into this, you know, this holistic, you know, depending on what group you're involved in, you know, this holistic, like ocean, and I'm not like shining as my individual self, or I'm not seen in a way. I really need to express my individual self apart from the group. And then you kind of come back around and you're like, no, we're all one. And I'm just part of the whole. So it's very interesting kind of the growth that happens. In order to understand deeply the type of mind and mode of learning that Jupiter represents, we have to contrast it with Mercury and to some extent Neptune. So this is what this is. So it's basically the other planets of mutable signs. In fact, we have to some extent, in fact, we have to explore as well the signs of the mental cross. It is often called, it is referred to also as the mutable quadruplicity, since there are 4 signs involved. All the signs of the mental cross and their ruling planets have to do with learning, and a comprehensive understanding of all their principles will allow us to appreciate the various modes of learning. Each takes a different approach and achieves a different perspective, and each actually complements the others in filling in part of the whole picture of knowing and understanding. And it's been unfortunate that the Mercurian approach of separation and detailed analysis through both Geminian and Virgoian modes has dominated West society and education for well over a century. A well-reasoned and powerful indictment of the profoundly negative and troubling consequences of this is the domination of the data-obsessed analytical mind upon Western educational institutions that can be found in Killing the Spirit, Higher Education in America by Paige Smith, an experienced educator and historian. He points out that by declaring so many religious, philosophical, and not politically correct subjects out of bounds for study in our schools, it constitutes a profound impoverishment and a shrinking of the scope of human experience that students are able to explore. He points out that the exclusive focus on research, a respectable name for endless gathering of data, most of which yield no insight or useful improvement, leads to a barrenness of intellect beyond calculating. So this is interesting because, I have my South node in Gemini and my North node in Jupiter. And I have often found myself, I was just telling somebody this, that I've often learned, because the ways that I learn is, I would say I'm neurodivergent. And I know a lot of people say that, of course, we're all neurodivergent, but the ways that I learn is just so different. But to adapt to this data obsessed culture, that's what I did. I would just collect all this data. And I was hoping to learn something by doing it. And I did. I eventually learned to take a step back and see the bigger picture through all of the detail that I was understanding. But it takes a really long time. And sometimes you miss the forest through the trees. And that's true. A lot of the times it has taken me a really long time to really trust my intuition, because it's a big part of me. My feeling nature is a big part of me. What I sense is happening, I usually sense beforehand, but I don't really understand it. And it takes me a while before all of the messages become clear. And sometimes I say things that provoke others, and I really don't understand why. And then somebody will come back and they'll tell me how impactful it was. And I'm not sure, sometimes how that happens. I'm not sure how, I've been trying to cultivate a little bit more connection to my higher mind so that I can understand what I'm sensing clearer, so that I can use it more productively and use it for other people's benefit, and sometimes we do all of this in astrology. We collect all this data and we get mired in, trying to control everything. And the life will not be controlled. I think that a life gives you surprises so that you try to see the future and you try to understand the future so you can control it. And then life comes in and says, haha, you can't control anything. It's just going to happen to you, and it's going to happen to you in the ways that it does. And you're not going to see it. That's why I kind of have let go of some of the things, because it can also add a lot of fear to your life, because you're always trying to anticipate what's coming. Oh my God, the weather is like, and you, depending on as the astrologer that you're listening to, you really can go down a rabbit hole where you're living in constant fear, especially right now, because everything is changing for everybody. We're letting go of a lot of things and we're going into something new. And it's scary when you can't see, when you don't have any security. And then when you kind of center into your own internal security, it's a growth opportunity to say, no matter what happens out there, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. I think that's, been a huge growth area in my life. And I'm still scared sometimes. I don't know where I'm going to get, money often. It's, doing astrology, unless you're a star, you're not really a money maker. Some people really try to shortcut that and promise all sorts of things, say they're a channeler, blah, blah, blah. And good, if that's their talent, that's great. But it's not, astrology is not a money-making business. So you either love it and you stick with it because you love it, and somehow you survive by kind of cobbling together this and that. But it's through that kind of internal security to know that you're going to be taken care of. And you're going to be able to adapt no matter what is going on the outside. It takes a leap of faith. It takes a leap of Jupiterian faith. So It's interesting too, the Jupiter return every 12 or so years is experienced by almost, okay, here it is, experienced by almost everybody is a pretty positive time. There's new plans, new possibilities, new aspirations start to take form, a lot of optimism and a lot of clear perceptions of future opportunities. Often there's rapid changes then too, but usually no matter what other aspects you're having then, if a Jupiter return is happening, the tendency is for there to be at least an overall tone of progress, whether it's getting a better job, getting to a graduate program, or something else that to you signifies progress and improvement. Now, in his Exploring Jupiter, now this was there's another book that he has, Relationships and Life Cycles, Astrological Patterns of Personal Experience. This is more about synastry, but it has that quote there. And then Exploring Jupiter, he says, Jupiter's return to its natal place should always be regarded as potentially key developmental phases, especially the conjunction, which liberates vast new energies for self-improvement, should never be overlooked. For it is a time of committing oneself to a new vision of the future, whether that entails a major change from the past or merely a relatively subtle adjustment of one's previous attitudes and expectations about the meaning of life. The conjunction of Jupiter to Jupiter is a key period of reorientation based on one's ideals and visions of the future. The renewal of faith in life, self, God, truth, or one's ideals, and a clearer perception of one's life's direction based on that faith is perhaps the best outcome of a Jupiter transit to Jupiter. So I want to say that also your Jupiter return from a traditional astrology perspective, they have what they call perfection years, and it happens in your 12th house. So what that means is that you're planting a seed basically for your future. So it's not like your Jupiter return is, to me, the time of reaping great rewards. It can be, but it's more about planting seeds. And it's interesting because my last Jupiter return in my 30s, that's when I was pregnant with my son. So it really literally is, planting this seed for something new, and then you get to your first house perfection year, and that's when you start to individuate that new thing. And even then, that's just the beginning. And so that's an interesting point. And I also think, if you're still struggling, like I was, it takes me a long time to transition into something new. This time can bring teachers and mentors into our life. And that's exactly what happened to me during my Jupiter return. So basically, my Jupiter return after, if you look at the last videos, I had a pretty tumultuous time of moving a couple of times, finding astrology, finding human design. And Jupiter here is natally in, it looks like it's in the 5th house, but if you look at some, the houses are not firm markers. They have what you call the quadrant houses and the mathematical configurations of how they predict which planet is in which house. It changes based on the house system. So I wouldn't think of it as kind of, this firm marker. And I always thought Jupiter was in my 5th house because it's kind of sitting in my 5th house. But if, in some traditions, you learn that if it's within a 5-degree orb, it's considered in the 6th house. And then some people say it's, it's both. You can have, features of the 5th house and the 6th house. And I think it's true for me, as a both and not either. But I've come to understand Jupiter in the 6th house as being kind of where it's, really sitting. And it was very interesting when I first began this exploration, when I was like, I can't work these full-time jobs anymore. I started a company and I called it Jupiter 6. And the only reason I called it Jupiter 6 was because, at the time I didn't know a lot of astrology. I had followed astrology forever, but it was more like I knew it kind of from the apps, basically, very superficially. And I knew, oh, well, I had a Jupiter transit, I thought, going on at the time, and I'm not sure what it was. I can't remember, but it was some Jupiter transit. And I was like, oh, Jupiter in the 10th house. If I call it Jupiter 10, my company name, maybe I'll have success. But I couldn't get that URL. So I was like, okay, what other? Oh, Jupiter in the 6th house is about everyday work. Maybe I'll call it Jupiter 6. And it was available. So that's what I named it. And it was very interesting to find out that Jupiter was actually in my 6th house. And there's a lot of fascinating things to that company's chart too. I think I went through it a little bit when I was reviewing it. But so this was a time of definitely great growth. My partner had lost his job. We were in Austin, Texas. We were forced to move again because, our son was, in a place in Austin where they were just putting families through, they're still doing that. A lot of laws that don't really consider what's going on in your family, talk about, suppression, and not having rights, depending on which, party ideology you believe in, you kind of have this different perspective. Well, I can't, my children can't, I can't do what's best for what I think my children need. I have to have legislation to make these decisions for me. And at the time, the medical establishment was also saying this is what's good for my son. Now, there are always subtleties to all this, and there's no right or wrong answer for anybody. But to have, that your rights taken away from you, and have these dangerous legislation where you think you're going to be taken, your child is going to be taken away from you because they're experiencing this very, very psychic desperation about their identity. It was scary. I mean, I had some experiences where, my son had fallen from a tree at school, and the ambulance was called, and the ambulance driver called the police when they found out about my child, and the police came and they were fine. But it was really scary because it was almost like vigilantes, so we had to move, and we moved, and we didn't have a lot of money. My partner lost his job, but I also went to decided to go to a cross-country trip to Sweden at the time. I was like, I saw the opportunity was Jupiter. I was like, I'm going to go because I really did. I had this, I was going through Neptune was still really close to my Jupiter. And I was kind of like really wanting to expand outside of my limitations. And I was like, oh, I really want to go to Sweden. I had never been. And, Jupiter is also about travel and getting out of the country. And we were going to go to New York City anyway. I was like, okay, I'll just get a trip to Sweden, and then I'll come back. And then, and that was a great experience, to be honest. I really learned a lot and connected with people that I hadn't known. And then especially my heretic sister, who I, she was my twin. And we met in person for the first time. And I met somebody else I no longer talk to who, showed me around, and it was very gracious. And was very important to me at the time. And then I had a teacher who I was taking a Living Your Design course, which is human design course. And his name was Alok, and he was a manifestor, 1-3 manifestor, triple split like me, if you know human design. And he was very impactful. They say manifestors are, but he's very, very impactful and had a lot of, just impacted me in a variety of ways, both positively and negatively. And, I was sort of enamored with his impact. He was an individual, I would say, and was such a prolific writer and thinker and a great teacher. And he impacted me, and he impacted me in ways that threw me back into myself. And it was good, but at the time it was very hard And I learned a lot because I was individuating. I had befriended a few other people. I was still like in the starry eyes of Neptune, having a little bit of a delusional thinking about things. And you know, I had really big hopes for the future, and it was, you know, all great. But at the same time, it put me on a path, I think, human design, where it was just like, I'm going to be this person and I'm individuating. And it really helped me accept these different parts of myself. But also, you know, you go to a certain point where you're individuating, and that's great. You need to do that. But there's a wall to that. And there's a wall where you don't grow. And I found that in my interactions with other people who, you know, I thought were this way, but then they ended up being another way. And I just saw so much during this time. I saw a lot about myself. And it was a growth period, but it was just a lot of harshness as well. I had a really hard year. And then that's when my son, when we moved, had this change in him that became just as, you know, kind of cognitive dissonance as the first time that he had this change. And it was like, what is going on? But in that, you know, I started to free up this rigidity that I had in my mind that a lot of people kind of hold on to, of thinking, of seeing different perspectives in a new light, and seeing the world in such a non-fixed way, and seeing kind of, you know, they always have these sayings in, you know, the Democratic places where, you know, both sidisms or whatever. But really, it's very important, I think, to see different perspectives and to come from a point of understanding, because I've seen so much, because I've been in these different communities about what people are railing against, like what the real issues are rather than the symptoms of the issues. And it's brought me a new perspective and understanding, because I was doing exactly the same thing as other people were doing. Like, I was like, you're wrong and I'm right. And if you're not with me, then you go to hell. And all these things that were coming up, like I said in my last presentation. But it was like, if you look at it from the other side, it was just being just as judgmental and closed-minded, I would say, to other people's points of view. Now, where's the drawing line? I talked about this in my last heretic episode. Like, I believe in individual freedoms. I definitely believe in that. And but where's the drawing line between the group and the individual? And that's the hardest part, because we are a world of, you know, we're not individual. We have to rely on other people. And so where is that drawing line? You have to come to some consensus about that drawing line. And to me, there's a lot of mental illness in the country that I live in. You can see this in the violence, in the ways that we treat each other. And I'm including myself in this. I'm not immune to it. And I'm not coming out and, you know, I have in human design, I have the judgment channel. And, you know, I do have a lot of judgments about society, but I don't have a lot of practical solutions for it, to be honest. Like, I wish I did. I see a lot of grieving and the spirit, like they talk about the spirit being taken out of life. And I see that I love technology, and used to be marketing technology. That was my thing. It was like futurism was awesome. But it's also really damaging when you're taking the spirit out of things. Like AI is, you know, basically robbing us of our spirit, you know, stealing from, you know, the creative people out there who've put out their stuff for free to try to get people to, you know, to try to get people to notice their thing, you know, their creativity, to get some recognition so that they can also make a living. You know, there's so many different ways that we try to survive in this world, and we can't all be Ottomans. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, why are we here to become some Ottoman for a factory AI system who does all of the work that we really enjoy? Like, I love to research and I love to understand different, you know, it's almost like the process is more wonderful than the actual output. And so if you have this like AI, like giving the output. It's like, and then, okay, we're just going to try to make money from it. It's like, well, where's the spirit? And that's what I loved about human design when I started to understand human design, is talking about the spirit and how much we need the spirit in our lives, and to take out the spirit and with the emotional spirit and the creative spirit is really destroying us in a lot of ways. And it's not all about matter. It's got to be something beyond that. And I think that's why people really look to the heavens, to religious, something beyond themselves to make sense of the universe. And there was also something I shared on my Facebook page from Ray Gross, which was talking about why people study astrology and why it makes sense. It was from Richard Tarnish's book, which I actually have an audiobook for. I wish I bought the book, because I love to listen, but I also like to read, and it's such a great book. I love scholarly works on astrology because it brings so much depth and history. And then there's all of this pop stuff that comes out about astrology, which isn't, it's just half true or just superficially true. And then once you see kind of the depth of scholarly level work, it just, I don't know, it just brings something. I'm always looking for the depth in things. I don't know that I'm a depth person myself. I don't have a lot of well to draw from. My memory is really bad. With the right people, they draw it out of me. But it's like you want to have the depth of life and the multifacetedness that the emotional life can bring to the table. People are always like, oh, emotions, they connect it with the animalistic emotions, the triggered responses. But people who are emotional can feel so much nuance to things. That's why I really appreciated Alok too, is because I could hear him. I'm auditory, and I could hear the frequencies of his voice. And he's the emotional person. I could feel where his emotions were, and it informed me how he was feeling, and it brought a new understanding to what he was saying, I guess. My father was, like that. I really connected with him emotionally. And his south node was on my moon. So it makes sense that we had that connection. He was a Scorpio, so he had, it was a trine relationship to my Pisces planets. And so it's so fascinating. I see all these patterns that come up. But anyway, in this new version, not the human design version, there's these ways that Robin Armstrong layers over the I Ching to the astrology. And in the human design system, my sun is on the gate 49. And but in Robin Armstrong's system, my Jupiter is actually there, which makes so much sense because it's called revolution and molting. And it's actually in line 3, which is popular discontent. And, at the time, too, I was kind of involved and had friendships where people were kind of railing against the rigidity and the dogma of some human design groups. And so I was also there kind of, experiencing that revolution at the same time. And in the third line, this is Ra's description. It's called popular discontent. And we have the theme of irresponsibility. Here we have the wave of allegiance, rejection, bonds made and broken. And that's true. At that time, there was a lot of bonds made and broken for me. So what kind of revolutions these will be. They're on-off revolutions. You are part of the hip-hop revolution, and then immediately you jump over the bebop revolution, and then you go back to the hip-hop. So yeah, I was part of the projector group, and then I saw all of the dogma in that group, and I got out, and then I became friends and then I got into a locks course, and then, had some falling outs with some of the friends that I had connected with in human design, and then had a kind of rejection from a lock that hurt hurt really bad. And so I was like, oh God, so it's interesting to see. I feel like you can see things from multiple perspectives. That's why I don't believe in one system ruling all. I can see it from multiple perspectives. And then, here you've got Saturn is right on my sun. And so I'm getting a lot of lessons, and Mars is right there too. And Neptune is, right near still my Jupiter. Saturn is right on my sun, and it's charm school. And it's called charm school. The second lines, if ever, deliver any kind of mutation. The nature of charm school is there is the ability to empower attentiveness through style. These people have a very powerful social mechanic. They have the capacity to get other people to be attentive, but at the moment that their turn comes, they do not have a lot to say. They have a social style, but they do not necessarily have a mutation that they're being able to contribute. Remember, this is a projection and not introspection. The belief that style can mask nature, and the sun is exalted here in this line, the ability to successfully delude oneself and others. This is a lot of stuff that you read. Sometimes you're just like, oh my God, is this really me? And yeah, it's part of you. It's not all of you. It's part of you. I can see this, sometimes it's like, and also some of the things that I need to heal from is like, well, what do I have that's special? Aquarius is always like, okay, I've got to be special in some way. I've got to be different. I am different, but what does that mean? And you're always latching on to other people who you feel are have something that you don't have. And so, there's a lot of stage fright, I think, when I come into a crowd. If I'm not prepared, what am I going to say? Where's my depth? There's the sense of generating the attentiveness of others. When their turn comes, they can be quite confused because there does not seem to be a great deal behind the mask. It is a social skill. These people are very good when the social skill is about their work. This is very handy to have on the material plane. They're very good at socializing at the stranger level, which is, again, kind of indicative of the 5-1. Easily being able to make contact, but the moment that it gets more serious, the moment that it would involve a mutation, bringing something as a contribution, that is where the dilemma begins. Their value is that they can bring about the attentiveness so easily that they can create the social opportunities. And to be honest, I've always, you were talking about projections in my last video of Heretic Sisters. And, I'm a Libra rising, and I moved around a lot. And so, yeah, there was this capability of being what people wanted me to be at the beginning. I could kind of do the song and dance. It's like kind of a projection quality of what people wanted from me, but it was very hard for me to maintain. And so that's where the projection ends. And, if I ever liked, I'm so shy and I would like somebody, I just could not speak at all. I could not talk and didn't have a lot of self-confidence. So, I've transformed a lot as I've grown older, but there's still those parts of me that's like, what can I bring to the table that other people don't have? And once you stop worrying about that, once you just really focus on what you enjoy, whatever you bring to the table is what you bring to the table. It might not be anything different. Somebody else definitely can put on these videos and say something much more profound, like Adam Ellenboss, or some of the other astrologers, professional astrologers, like Ann Ortley, and I'm like, what am I going to say? But it doesn't matter because, I really enjoy this work. And these videos actually teach me a lot. And it's just what I enjoy. And I bring what I bring. So yeah, I think that's about it that I really wanted to talk about the Jupiter return. Again, I really appreciate your support, and I hope these videos are helpful for you. And I hope that you connect either in my newsletter or on my Facebook page. I'll link it below. And I'll also remember that astrologer. I'm going to kick myself because he's such a popular astrologer. I follow him all the time. For some reason, I can't remember his name right at this moment. He's in Aries, and I know his face. I'm going to kick myself, but I'll link him below. And that video specifically is a really great video about the glyphs. I actually found a lot of great books upon his recommendation because he's a prolific reader and also a poet as well. And so I wish I could remember his name, but I can't. I'm not going to force it. But anyway, thank you. I hope you like and subscribe to this video if nothing else. I appreciate your support. Have a great weekend.